Session on revival of heritage, specifically to Hyderabad, and I think it's more specific to residency building. And I'm delighted that we have two people here who have worked with the residency building for quite some time, and they have been at the core of the revival of that building and core of conservation of that building, and how that building has been resurrected from almost like a dungeon to something where people can walk in, see, and walk in awe. And the two persons who have made it possible is Sarath Chandra, who is a conservation architect. He's worked on the residency building conservation for the last 7-8 years. And he has also worked in Hampi and other places. And he curated the museum in Hampi. You can hear me? Now you can hear me. Yeah, right. Okay. So Sarath Chandra has been involved with the residency building for quite some time, and Anuradha Naik also has been involved with the residency building. She is a trained architect and conservation architect. She studied in Edinburgh, and she has if you go to the residency building, you climb up the flight of stairs and you see the interpretation center that has been curated by her. So the experience and understanding of the residency building is thanks to her, and she wrote a book on the residency restoration also. I don't know whether it's available or no. It will be available in April. It's a very interesting book, and so I won't take much time. I would like them to speak about their experience with the residency building. I'll begin with Sarath, asking him, like, when he took over the project, what was the status of the thing?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My first entry, I first visited residency in the year 2000 when I just passed out my architecture. And I was taken by the architect whom I was working with, Vasanta Shobha Turaga. She took me there and to clean up the model in the dungeons actually. Not in the dungeons, in the gardens behind. It was a jungle, it was an overgrown place. So that was my first introduction with the to the residency. Then my formal commissioning happened on restoring the residency in the year 2007. When before that, World Monuments Fund has nominated the site as one of the 100 most endangered buildings in the world. In the world, so that's how they were all trying to put together how we can preserve this building. So in 2007, we started the preparing a overall conservation management plan. But by the time when we started it in 2007, White Mughals was out, and there were a lot of curious visitors who have read the book and coming to see, okay, what is this place like? Did really the story happen here? What was it? So there were many unknowns. We never had even a basic building drawings also. So 7 to 10, it took us 3 years nearly to actually prepare a plan, and then 3 more years to raise funds for it. Today, they have spent around more than $2 million to restore the whole building. Around 12 to 14 crores actually they have spent to restore the building. State government also pitched a small portion of it. It took us till 2014 for us to launch the project actually. And then it took us, we finished the project now in 2022, and we kind of just handed it over to the Women's College for its future maintenance and management. So this whole journey has been with lot of surprises, plenty of challenges on because at the initial stages, no one was sure whether really it could be done, whether we have that kind of money, what is being estimated. But somehow, if I look back, it all came together. There was a kind of, with the starting of the project, there was kind of growing confidence among various supporters, I would say, that okay, it could happen. In fact, I remember the day I was actually returning from Hampi and I got a call that the roof collapsed of the Western Oval Room. It was a heavy rain. I think 1 week before, we both were top of that Western Oval Room, just where the whole roof collapsed, 2 floors down, the complete wooden roof. So it was only deteriorating, I mean, more and more. And the college actually has abandoned it. The pace of deterioration accelerated more from 2007-8 when they started abandoning the building. So it was, the challenges were only increasing.
I'd like to bring Anuradha Naik into this conversation because when we are talking about residency building, we need to understand the context in which the residency building was built and what is the residency building and why it's so much important to preserve, conserve and cherish it, kind of a thing. Because she has written a book, she has curated the interpretation center, she has a deeper understanding of she can give the context of the building and the need to conserve it, kind of thing, and how she went about her task. And like, for example, there were a lot of discoveries in the place, and there are a lot of discoveries which are academic, there were a lot of discoveries which are physical also. So I would like Anuradha Naik to tell about her experience with the building and the conservation and putting it in a context for lay people to understand.
Thank you, Serish. Good afternoon, everyone. There are 2 parts to your question, Serish. The first is to do with the historic context and the second to do with the discoveries. To do with the historic context, I think the residency building, one has to go back to the 18th century, and the Deccan then was in a state of flux. There was a power tussle between the French, the English, and of course the Nizams. And so the French were more powerful at that time, and the British had to maintain their own supremacy within the social fabric of the Deccan. And so they, it's now immortalized in Dalrymple's book, The White Mughals, but the British wanted to construct a building in Hyderabad, which would be their visual symbol of power. So it was really architecture being used in its most potent form as a symbol of political alliance, of stature, and that, as we can see in what the history of the building unfolded, the residency really succeeded in achieving that object. The French at that point were more important. There was a very strong presence of the French in Hyderabad, and interestingly, the headquarters of the French contingent was at the base of the Charminar itself. So they were really very much at the center of Hyderabad politics. At the same time, at 1798, if the history of the region, if you look at it, we had the Third Anglo-Mysore wars, and at the Battle of Seringapatam, when there was a supremacy with the British, they as a sort of I wouldn't say maybe as an offshoot of that, the construction of the residency came about. And James Kirkpatrick, who's the hero of The White Mughals, he was central to all of this at that time. And he insisted that the British construct a huge building on the banks, in Hyderabad city. The Nizam was wary of having a foreign an ally coming in so close to the city of Hyderabad. And interestingly, he gave land just north of the river Musi to construct the British residency. That was strategic because he wanted the British to be close to him so he could keep a watch on them. At the same time, not too close either, because it was away from the walled city, so they would know exactly what was happening if he was across the river from the city of Hyderabad. But what happened subsequently as the events of the 19th century unfolded is that the residency building soon became the node of power in Hyderabad. It changed the direction of growth. The growth of Hyderabad city was towards the south. Subsequent to construction of the residency in Hyderabad, and there's a whole lot of story of the Sikandrabad residency, which I won't touch on because it will get too complicated. But the construction of the British residency north of the river Musi swung the direction of growth from the south to the north. Second, the Nizam himself, the fifth Nizam, by the time of Afzal-ud-Dawla, he constructed in Chaur Mahalla Palace a courtyard in the European style, and that was not to sort of copy the British in terms of a style, but to show that that was the new visual style of power. Architecturally, the European style was used, which has been everywhere. I mean, up to Adolf Hitler, people used it. But in Hyderabad, it was Afzal-ud-Dawla who constructed in that style. And third, it changed the architecture and the lifestyle of the people of Hyderabad. So, of course, the crowning glory of that style is the Falaknuma Palace, which was constructed at a different scale altogether. But also the fact that, the furniture changed. People would sit on chairs as opposed to sitting on takats or on the floor. The whole concept of the darbar at Chaur Mahalla changed. So earlier, to meet the resident had to go to meet the Nizam, would have to take his shoes off, would have to be seated on the floor. But following all the offshoots of the construction of the residency, the way the resident lived there, that even changed how the Nizam received the British resident and, of course, the Viceroy at the palace. So it had a huge offshoot over time. The second part of your question was to do with the discoveries.
Actually, the second part of the question is to the discoveries, in the sense when you talk about architecture, and as Sarath has showed us on that day, so there was changes in the residency building. So they changed over a short period of time, from trying to mingle with the culture and later to being a little aloof from the culture. So how did this thing work?
I was asked to do the book on the residency, which has been brought out by a British publisher called Scala. It should be available in the Indian market by April. And I started work on the building little knowing how the world was going to change. This was in end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And of course, my main source of research was to be the British Library in London, and I could not access it even up to now, I think I'm on the wait list somewhere. But what I did have the advantage of was the building, which was right here in Hyderabad. And in hindsight, that was perhaps the best thing that could have happened, because to look at the building closely, and sometimes the clues that you want, I think as a conservation architect, and I'm sure Sarath will agree, a lot of our work is, it's like being a detective, because you go into the space, you look at the space, you look for clues, and the clues come in places where you least expect them. And the British residency also did throw up similar things, which, given the benefit of time sitting at home in the lockdown, I could overlay things on various drawings, and we had multiple conversations, Sarath and I, over Zoom for that. The building, it turned out that, contrary to what people believed, that it was Kirkpatrick who had designed the building from scratch, it was an existing building that was constructed there by his brother William Kirkpatrick, which was only then added upon. And when you look at correspondence of Kirkpatrick with his family in England at that time, he says very clearly that I'm making improvements to the house. So it's like small words like that gave ideas or clues as to what the building might have. Then there were construction joints in certain places, which clearly showed that there was a difference in in the time of construction. Like, if you have a building and you add another room to it, there was a change of the size of brick. There was a construction joint of how a new structure was being keyed into the old one. There were certain, like the main portico in the front, which is the 6 Corinthian capital, the columns that you see, those were tied back with steel straps to the main Darbar Hall wall. That again is a very typical British construction and detail, which is not something that you find very often in this part of the world. So these sort of things gave clues as to what the building might have been like and how it was added on. But more interestingly, it was until then attributed to a 19-year-old cadet, Samuel Russell. And looking at the way the building was designed and added on to, I think through the book now we're saying that it was this very celebrated British architect called Henry Holland, who was the architect for the British royalty at that time, and who did Carlton House, which then went on to become Buckingham Palace, that it was he who could have been very highly responsible for the design of the residency.
So if what you're saying is correct, then what we used to learn from Dalrymple's book and other things about a small map being shown to the Nizam and a big map being shown to the Nizam, and him agreeing to the smaller map shown by Kirkpatrick on the advice of somebody. So that story is true or false?
Well, I always doubted the story to begin with, because as a staunch Hyderabadi, I would expect that the Nizams had a little bit more intelligence than being shown a piece of paper. I always debated that story. There is no evidence of something like that. It just makes for, flavorsome story to tell, I suppose. But yes.
Okay. So actually the story is told in Dalrymple's book about Kirkpatrick showing a large map to the Nizam and wanting that plot of land to build the residency. And the Nizam says no. Then some advisor tells him to draw the same map on a small piece of paper. He draws it on a small piece of paper, and then the Nizam agrees to that. So if we go by the book and the information and I think the story may not be entirely accurate kind of thing.
Well, it's very unlikely to have actually happened at all, because the way the building was constructed over time in stages by different people. And I think Sarath mentioned the model to begin with, and that shows the building very significant again, because it shows the building before it was completed in the form that we know it today.
I would like to bring in Sarath, because the residency building is not just the only building. Behind it was the Rang Mahal, which was Karunissa's house, and the only portion that is remaining is the entrance to that. And that Karunissa's house was demolished apparently in 1860. And when Sarath is working on the Deccan Garden in that area, he found traces of the house, he says, and he found the alignment of that house. So I would like Sarath to share his findings and the work that they're doing on the Rang Mahal and restoring the Karunissa's entrance.
We are very sure that there was a kind of a bungalow which was there. And we have evidence also saying that, archival evidence saying that the building was demolished in 1860s. But we never...
Why was it demolished?
Yeah, it was after 1857. There was a whole thing about... there is a kind of a conflict, right? So, and this native style building is right within this campus. So what I think Colonel Campbell writes, saying that it's immoral to have a native style building in our campus. And it was demolished in 1860s. So where was it? Was the big question we had. So the only evidence we had was a dollhouse, and there were the first story what we hear is William Dalrymple's book of why that was there, because she was in Parda and she could not see, and all those, there are different stories in that. But as an architect, I think I feel that if you look at Vitruvius' treatise, it says that when you start constructing such a mansion, you should build But now, in the recent findings, I have another theory, which, because recently in the last 8 months, we have been working on the Rang Mahal gardens. So that's where, when we started removing the soil, we found fountains. Of course, fountains were found much earlier. Couple of years back, with the help of Department of Archaeology, that area was excavated also. Then we found lots of water channels at a much lower level. And then we found small coins and little bit of archaeology. Right behind the gate, we found a small sword, of course, which was completely rusted, behind the Mughal style gate. And there is a pigeon house and everything. So we were trying to relate where was the building. The only high area, which was like a mound, is where the fountains were there. Then recently, when we were clearing, we started finding the walls of a house which has plaster right till the below, and that walls are going right beneath the raised mound where the fountains are there. So we found alignments of 3-4 rooms. So that probably is the one, and there are water channels, drains coming from that. And now what we found out that was that model is above these drains. So which means that these old drains, terracotta pipes were there on which this model was constructed. So most probably, which I'm more confident now, I mean I can't be sure until we do the complete exploration, the model was constructed post 1860. But the question comes back, that has the original facade of 1880 painting, of original facade which was of the Darbar Hall, which is seen, because what the circular staircase, what you see in Darbar Hall, that was added, we considered it as a post 1818 addition. So if that was added in 1818, then why did they build a model with the original facade, with the dogleg staircase like Falaknama? So anyway, these are all unanswered questions. Shortly we are going to do a ground penetrating radar survey. Hopefully we'll find the full footprint. Then we can kind of disseminate it more.
So you have restored the garden. So on what is the evidence on which you restored it?
So what we have done there is we tried to make it. We tried to keep all the layers what we found. One, the fountains. The original layer was the oldest, where we found the oldest channels, which are much at a lower level. And then the upper layer are the fountains, and then there is a whole English layer. So there are 3 layers of garden. One of the oldest from our landscape architect study and things, he feels that was a Deccani garden, which was part of where we are finding the footprints, where it is like a linear garden, which is very, very typical to a Deccani garden, which you can see even in Asaf Jahi interventions in Bidar Fort and all those things where there are linear gardens. So keeping that as a principle, and how the Deccani gardens were, they were productive, there were aroma and things like that. So there are fruit trees, there are flowering plants, so there are aromatic plants. Like that, the landscape architect designed certain pattern there, and it's a representative. What we see, the visual evidence is all the British lawns. The earliest photographs I think we have of 1900s of the garden, and the Gitney videos and all those things.
So, like when we talk about Kaironis's garden and also the residency building, you talk about the movement of the city to the north from beyond the Musi. So the residency building itself undergoes a change, right? Earlier there were swings in the front of the residency building. Now the swings are there only on the Empress Gate. The Lion and Unicorn. Okay. So why did this change take place?
I think every building is something which is in a state of flux because it's being used. We get used to seeing buildings.
The frontage has been changed from one portion to the other.
So the residency building itself underwent transformation. The pattern of usage of the building was also different. It was not in continuous ownership. Every 4 years, a new resident would come to occupy the building, and with every resident, there was a change in preferences. So, it went on from being, very early on, I think Malcolm, who was the second or third resident who stayed there, he didn't like the residency at all. He thought it was extremely pretentious. So he converted the double-story Darbar Hall into 2 floors and made his library there. And he said, why should we, the British, who are just ambassadors or envoys in the court of the Nizam, have all of this? There were other residents who wanted to shift the residency altogether to Bolaram, which was the second residency, which was with the cantonment. So the building itself, like sometimes you see also there are files and papers in the archives which show how a particular resident's wife liked violet flowers, so the gardens changed. I mean, everything changed because it was somebody's home for 4 years, and then somebody else came along and changed it. With regard to the sphinxes, that's a slightly more, again, goes back to the whole politics of power and architecture being used as that. The last we see of the photographs of the sphinxes is in 1899. And the next photograph is from the visit of Lord Curzon in, I think, 1899 visit of Lord Dufferin. You see the sphinxes in the front, and they sort of metamorphose into being lions by the time of Lord Curzon's visit in 1903. Now, Lord Curzon's visit was a very significant one politically in Hyderabad because that's when he came and took Berar away. And he gave also through the 6th Nizam the CBE, and the Nizam all joked right up to the end that it's only, and he said it was gave Berar away, not anything else. So so I think that the sphinxes changing into lions is also significant because that was to sort of say that the British are here, and that was a power statement at that time. But the residency building itself, right up to 1947, changed quite significantly.
So when this residency building has been restored, we're talking about the history and all those things. Now the building has been restored, it's there, and the film shootings, the people who come. So how does Hyderabad is immensity of riches in terms of heritage and history. There are a lot of buildings are there which are very beautiful, which need to be preserved and all this. So is there a lesson in the way we preserved residency building and which can be replicated in other places?
I think Sarath should also answer this.
In terms of conservation practice, yes, there is a lot of learnings. It's one of the best documented projects I have seen. Where every action of ours we try to document, and it's available for everyone to see. We are shortly putting all our things in the thing. There is a small conservation gallery also in the interpretation center. I think it has, whomever I have interacted, it helped. There is a certain confidence in the, of course there are many other projects happening across Hyderabad. But this is one project. I think Chomala and this were started together. In fact, Mapuji used to joke, look, we started together, but we finished first and you are still not even started. That was what he said in 2014 or 13. Because both were started sometime around the same 2002, like that. But it took us, I think, 20 years to come to this stage. So it took us a lot of time to build a willingness among the decision makers, yes, this can be done. So that, and a lot of convergence we have to bring in. There are multiple stakeholders. It's a functioning college where there are 5,000 students studying. So we have to bring together Usmania University. We have to bring Department of Heritage and lot of donors. So luckily it took time, but everything happened together. So this whole process, I think, is a very important learning thing on how one can deal with such things. Yes, there are challenges in managing that place for future. That is what we are now still working on. We are trying to institutionalize how many years the donors will keep on supporting such place. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to institutionalize this whole practice of maintenance of the building. See, in 2022 we handed over the building to the college, and since then we have been hand-holding the college to actually maintain the building. Okay, how do you maintain the polished wooden floors? How do you maintain lime plastered walls? How do you maintain the paper mache ceiling? How does one run a museum? How can college students benefit from it? Can college Department of History be part of the thing? So these are some things new for me also in such a context, which are very interesting for me and the team, and there is a management committee where all donors are still part of it. They really want to see that this won't be destroyed in next few months or years to come. So one of our main aim is to institutionalize this, what I call it as a preventive conservation, and see the building is put to active use, vibrant space. In fact, I think I was mentioning to you that probably next Hyderabad Literary Festival should happen there. or things like that. So it has the potential. It has a huge site. It's very grand. There are plenty of rooms. 4,000 students on the campus. Things like that.
So, is there a way, we can learn about the adaptive reuse? Like, for example, the building is grand and nice, but what's beyond that? Like, what do we do beyond that? Like, for example, her exhibition in the Interpretation Center gives a context to the building. So do we need to have these interpretation centers in all the places? How do we do it? Like, you're from Hyderabad, you can share your thoughts on that. Because we are restoring the Qutub Shahi tombs, we are restoring the Golconda Fort, then the stepwell has been restored at Bansilal Pet, and there are a lot of small things that are happening. And like when we go to Chaumala Palace, we see the maps, museum, the swords and all this part of your work kind of a thing. So is there a way where we can replicate these kind of things in other places?
I think that is the first step, is for people to understand that heritage is important. Personally, I don't believe, this is a personal view, that not every old building should be a museum, because everybody says, I know I'm talking on a sensitive topic here, but the Osmania General Hospital, people say, oh, let's make it into a museum. My question is, what are we going to put in it? Why should every old building be a museum? Why should every old building be culture? The oldest hospital in London is 1,000 years old. It is still being used as the hospital, St. Thomas and Guy. The Duke of Edinburgh was admitted there every single time he was unwell. So why is it that why can't we use old structures for new uses? You can still have the best of cutting edge medicine inside an old building if that building is adapted to be used as one. And I think that this tendency of ours to say that all old buildings should be for culture is wrong. Because if you also look at it in terms of, like sustainability of using, reusing materials, it is also, it's green, to reuse a building. In, I think most Scandinavian countries now, it is banned to demolish and reconstruct buildings. You need to reuse buildings. So where are we on that take? Why are we not using our buildings? Because the amount of energy that is consumed in demolition and reconstruction is phenomenal. And these structures like the Osmania Hospital, I was asked to have a look at it a few years ago. The walls are about 1 meter deep. If the walls are 1 meter deep, even for radiation, for cancer therapy, those are deep enough. So why is it that we can't think out of the box and say that let us reuse these old buildings because it's good for the environment, it's local, the materials used, I think a lot of the granite that came for Osmania Hospital came from Gagan Pahad, which is very close to the airport. So it is local, it can be used. It was designed by Vincent Esch to be a hospital. So, and if you see the wards, my father worked there. So if you see the wards, if you see how spaciously it's designed, it has cross ventilation, it has everything which is just absolutely, you know, what you would want to design ideally as being a hospital space. So yes, while interpretation of heritage is important to understand it, I personally do not believe that every old building should be meant for culture. It should be for the use that it's meant to be. If it's an old school, it should continue as a school. Why should young children be in a modern building with glass windows? Why can't they study in a, you know, in a vernacular style Deccanese school?
Yes, that's good. Actually, that's very interesting because my question was basically about the old buildings that are there, which are not in use, like the Khazana building and all this. They need to be preserved and curated and given a context to why the buildings exist. Like what you said about OGH is very important because OGH is like in the crosshairs for a very long period. It's like that building has to be demolished and something grand has to be built there. But OGH is part of the Hyderabad architectural narrative, in the sense, if you stand on the Musi, that bank of the river, you see these 3-4 buildings, and that shows the growth of Hyderabad's heritage and how it looked at one point of time, kind of a thing. So I think we are running out of time. I would like people to ask questions. That would be interesting, unless Sarath wants to add something. Huh? You can ask.
It's a privilege to hear about Hyderabad conservation and retaining the essence of Hyderabad, so to say. A small bit of introduction about me from this context would be, we go about 11 generations in Hyderabad. We were talking about Osmania General Hospital. Had the privilege of 2 superintendents of Osmania General Hospitals from the family, Dr. V.N. Wagre, Dr. Binod Kumar Sahai, uncles. So we spoke about British residency. Another humbled to say that the road which starts from Abbots, which is Jawaharlal Nehru statue, till the British residency is named after my grandmother's great-great-grandfather, Raja Mahipatram, who fought against the French and the Dutch and was Prime Minister designate to Sikandar Jah. So very deeply embedded to the history, culture and the ethos of Hyderabad. British residency, what I found extremely enthralling was the concept of adaptive use. While retaining the essence and soul of the building, how can we create an interface with the current generation so that they get the best of what was there, the way it was created, and also take back what they can contribute to, and in terms of creating a passion for retaining of the same ethos. So, and what is happening about this Anil Kamineni's fort? Was it part of your restoration project as well? Domkonda Fort.
I worked on Domkonda Fort for 10 years now. We've just won the UNESCO award.
I know.
But it's a private fort, and I think a part of it is open for the public, and they are conducting cultural events there. There was a Telugu literature festival a few weeks ago, and there's another one in Urdu poetry based on his uncle Asghar, Rajeshwar Rao Asghar, in a few weeks' time.
So Umapati uncle is again like family to us, and Anil Kamineni was again.
Can you stick to the question?
Yeah, that was about it. It was more about expressing gratitude and thanks for taking up the project than a question.
Thank you.
It's working.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anuradha ma'am, Sarath sir, and Nanisetti sir. It is very nice listening to all of you all. I have two young boys at home, and one of them is really interested in taking up. He's very interested in history. He comes from this school, and he likes looking at restoring old buildings. And he comes back to me asking me, "What can I do more, ma?" I don't know. So that's one question. How can I help him understand what should he look at so that he could take it ahead in terms of what he can study, what courses he can do, how can he take it ahead? I see him very passionate. The school is a very big part of that passion of his. Second question, in terms of institutionalizing restoration, what does this mean to commoners who are non-architects but are interested to make sure that the culture of the city that they are living in continues to exist?
So, I think Sarath can answer the institutionalizing.
When I meant institutionalizing, there is a in-house lack of capacity in the university there to maintain its facilities, its historic property. So what we are trying to do is how we can build capacity within the university, because we as professionals can't be there for our lifetime to keep on maintaining the building. So it has to be inbuilt within the institution on what kind of methods, what kind of techniques they need to use, what kind of skills they require to do the things. As part of that, we want to conduct, we are already conducted, in fact, one training program last 2-3 months back, and there is a whole, one is looking at actually starting a center for excellence in heritage. It is under discussion. How, because it is now an independent university, it already is, what do I say, it was already an autonomous institution. Now it has become a university. They can frame their own courses, start their own centers. So the whole idea is using this experience, like there is a lime chakki. So can common households of Hyderabad, people who have heritage houses, can they come there? Can they come and learn? I mean, everything is there. Why not? There is ongoing conservation work happening. Okay, how we can manage historic gardens, like Rang Mahal garden is restored now to an extent. So recently we did a lime wash. So one of the things what we felt is, okay, why can't heritage house owners come when this lime wash is being done? It's not a rocket science. It's a very simple way of doing lime wash. So how to use lime, what kind of lime, shell lime, okay, who are your craftsmen? So probably one day when this whole thing materializes, your kids can come and participate in it. I can't hear.
Are we trying to understand that there could be some outreaches done in schools?
Yeah. So what we can do is there are 2 dedicated people who conduct the tours at the residency now. I can share their numbers. You can anytime go in. They both are trained now in the last training workshop. There were 6 students from UK and 6 students from India who were trained in the whole thing. So I'll share the numbers. You can book a slot with them and they can help you.
So regarding the actual restoration, I found a lot of Madras terrace roof in the rear of the residency. Are you replacing it with RCC or continuing with that?
No. We are, as part of the conservation philosophy and approach followed at residency, we are trying to retain the Madras terrace roofs. In fact, the whole of the western oval room collapsed. So the old Madras terrace roof collapsed. So we restored again the Madras terrace roof, 100%. Yes, it is expensive to do it, but we are trying to see in other side wings to follow the same approach.
We have time enough only for 2 more questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this particularly for Mr. Sarath Chandra. I was told, I heard that there are around 2 crores of rupees donated by Britisher. Is it fact for the restoration?
It's not 2 crores, it's 2 million pounds.
2 million pounds. Okay.
So he's one of the single largest donor to the World Monuments Fund, who was instrumental in restoring the building.
So it is a fact.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for all these informations. Very interesting. So I have very fundamental questions on this. When you take up a heritage building for restorations, and as you are telling that it should be used for the purpose for which it was basically designed, that's very nice, interesting. Yes, it should be that only. But since you take up a heritage building, I believe you can see physically, but you don't have much information about the structures, how it is standing, and its foundations and all those things. So when you recommend that the structures, the heritage building should be used further with the restorations what you're doing for the shop face, how you ensure normally that the building is still steady enough to continue and is safe also?
I think the primary goal before commencing any restoration or conservation work is to make sure the building is safe. It may look very pretty, but unless it is safe for the users, there's no use. So that is part of what is undertaken as the research prior to the commencement of any site works. You have to assess the buildings, and it's part of the research is not just the history, but the development of the materials, the use of materials, which also then give one informs the other. So you can tell how old the materials are if you look at the size of the bricks or the inclusion of steel into buildings. So I think all of that does form part of the research before we take anything on. It's important. It is fundamental.
Yeah, every conservation project is actually involves huge amount of research. It's like dissecting a body and understanding which part is gone, which part is not gone, what is function, how much life is there. To give a simple analogy. So it's almost like that. So every project is a new finding is there.
Abysmal, but is there, from the work you've done, do you know of any structure which was badly affected, and can you elaborate on that?
I think that 2 points to your question. The first is that what was affected by the floods. Several of the buildings, like you mentioned, was like what was in the low-lying areas. That was illegal construction, which shouldn't have been there in the first place, which is why it got washed away to a large extent. The second part to do with the heritage structures, a lot of the structures, heritage that remain, are larger buildings like the, public buildings, the palaces, which would have been built away from the flood lines. As you know, that in 1908, after the really huge floods, which are a defining moment in Hyderabad's history, after that, a lot of the city was cleaned up, so to speak. So they removed every building from the low-lying areas, pushed the housing colony back. Along the river belt it was called the Riverbank District. So they made sure that it was only public buildings and institutional buildings over there and nothing else. And they studied the flood line. So if you look at a 1914 map of Hyderabad, you'll actually see the levels to which the floods came, and nothing was allowed to be constructed closer to that. So the old buildings that remain were sort of, it was tidied up to make sure that these buildings in 1908, subsequent to the floods, would not get affected. With regard to what got affected in terms of old buildings, if buildings were not in a state of, if in a terrible state of disrepair or not being used or not being maintained properly, very often in old buildings, what tends to go first is the roof because of poor maintenance. Not the walls, because the walls are usually load-bearing. So it was structures which were neglected for a long time, not necessarily. So it's kind of probably not the right way of looking at it as being an old building versus a new building, but looking at, was it on a floodplain, first point, was it in a low-lying area that could have affected it, and second, what was the health of the building before the floods?
So, we are near the end of the session. Like, I'll answer your question. One of the big destruction due to the flood was the Majnu Burj. Inside the Golconda Fort, it collapsed. Okay, and one more interesting aspect is the residency building has 6 flood high-level markers. Okay, it shows the level of the flood kind of a thing. Where the water.
The 1908 flood.
1908 flood, September 28, 1908 flood. So we are near end of the session, and I would like to thank Anuradha Naik for sharing so much information, and Sarath Chandra for sharing what could be industrial espionage kind of thing, the information about restoration, construction, and adaptive reuse and other things. Thank you all for being patient and listening to some old tales. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Serish, Sarath Chandra, and Anuradha Naik. Old tales are always interesting, and sometimes more interesting than the new tales, and that's why we are doing the session here. Thank you very much for this.
So actually we ended 4 minutes before this, and
Okay.
Yeah, we ended 4 minutes before this. So it's very un-Hyderabadi kind of a thing. And
just go ahead.
Hyderabad is known for the land of, city of pearls and biryani and so on, but it also stands for science. We had an observatory, Nizami Observatory in Amirpet, which is, the structures are still strong, but the domes are dilapidating. Is it on the list of conservation?
I think it's one of the identified heritage buildings. I think GHMC or someone, it's under the Usmani University, ownership of the Usmani University. So there were a lot of attempts earlier to preserve it, but I don't know what is the current status.
Japal Rangapur.
So this site is now under threat. It can be very
Well, there are.
the state government has to do it. They have to take a call on it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Serish. Thank you, Sarath Chandra. And thank you, Anuradha Naik.